Alright everybody, I have never done a video blog before, and I kind of feel awkward just talking into a computer instead of talking to a human being. But here goes my first video blog. This week, for our sociology class, I was tasked with describing a macro-level policy regarding politics, housing, or economics that was intended to improve the condition of racial and ethnic relations at the micro level that may have actually been harmful. It took me a while to kind of come up with something. I scoured several policies and looked through our book and went online. But I think I found something. I want to focus on a portion of the Voting Rights Act that I think may be creating some divisiveness as we move into the future of our country. Now, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a very momentous step towards racial equality in the United States. Prior to this, most southern states and some other states throughout the country had very draconian barriers to the voting process that were geared towards preventing minorities from participating in the electoral process. These included nearly impossible literacy tests that no one could ever really pass, even white people couldn't pass them. There were poll taxes and other measures that kept people from voting. But the Voting Rights Act eliminated these restrictions and it opened the process to minorities. The Voting Rights Act also had several other provisions that guaranteed voting rights to citizens. It made sure that disabled people have access to the polls, amongst other things. And it also guaranteed effective voting by minorities. This was to mean certain racial or ethnic voting blocs electing members of those voting blocs. And at that time, minorities electing minority candidates was considered proof of effective voting. Well, in 1982, the Act was amended and expanded, and it further explained that a violation of the Act would occur if nominating and electing processes were not equally open to participation by minority voters, and if they had less opportunity than other members of the electorate to participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. This meant that, again, minorities would elect minority candidates. The Senate Committee on the Judiciary in 1982 also issued a report and suggested 7 factors to consider when determining if something was a possible violation of the provision. One of the measures was the extent to which members of the minority group have been elected to public office in the jurisdiction. Now, while the Act has opened the door for the election of many minority candidates into office and has allowed for true substantive representation of minorities in politics, I think this measure has a bit of a flaw in it. It assumes that a minority voter is always going to vote for a minority candidate. Transversely, it assumes that a white voter is always going to vote for a white candidate. And this may be the case much of the time, but I don't think it's necessarily fair to assume that all racial groups act, think, and vote alike. Our country is supposed to be a land of freedom, and we cherish individuality here. This includes the freedom to act and think as one chooses and wishes, and vote as one chooses to think as one wishes. So the biggest problem I see with the measure is that it may help perpetuate racial polarization in the country going forward. By assuming that blacks always vote for blacks, Hispanics always vote for Hispanics, and whites always vote for whites, we may be furthering the idea that the races will never work together as one. I think this leads to more of an us versus them bunker mentality, and it continues to polarize us racially. As we move forward, I believe this provision needs to be reexamined. It has been necessary to ensure substantive representation by minorities. It eliminated things like at-large elections that completely excluded minorities from being elected, and it's made sure that we have had minority voices in legislative processes and other things. But we may need to re-examine this to make sure that this is really how we want to measure whether or not our voting is effective. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching.